Well, I have a confession to make. I get comments and I get people yelling at me all the time. And they tell me that cops are a bunch of liars. That we're paid to lie to people. That we don't get paid to tell the truth. Well, that statement is partly right. I'm here to admit to you now that cops get paid to lie. And I've lied many, many, many times in my career. The first story that I want to tell you about, one of the biggest lies that I ever told somebody. It was, I don't know, late at night, like 2 a.m. I was dispatched on a call that somebody had been shot, that somebody was feeling suicidal and they shot themselves. When we arrived on scene, we were directed to the backyard where the guy was laying in the yard. He was laying flat on his back, had shot himself in the belly. He told us about how he had a .22 pistol, a very small caliber gun. He was laying there, complained that he couldn't move, and told us that he was going to try to kill himself, but he had second thoughts, and he accidentally shot himself in the belly. And I remember I pulled his shirt away, I looked, and there was a tiny little hole above his belly button, below his rib cage. Just a tiny little hole, no blood coming out. He was breathing okay, like he wasn't labored breathing or anything like that. He said that he couldn't move, and I assumed it was mostly from the shock. Just the fact that he was going through an emotional time, and he had in fact shot himself, and he was probably in a lot of pain, even though he wasn't really calling out in pain. But his body was probably in shock, and that's why he couldn't move. And I just told him, just to stay where you're at, bud. Help's on the way. And other officers came and joined me, and we stood around, waiting for the ambulance to come. There was nothing that we could do at this point. He was laying there. He was talking to us. He wasn't bleeding externally. There was nothing that in my capabilities that I would have been able to do other than just talk to this guy, keep him calm, and wait for the medics to arrive. Some of the officers kind of split off, went up to the front door, directed the medics to the alley. They came up the alley and picked the guy up. While we were waiting on them, I stood there and I talked to him. I might have even crouched down. And he was crying and he was saying, "I don't want to die. Please help me." All the normal things that you would expect someone to say when they'd been shot and they were terrified. I remember looking at the wound, and I looked at the way he was talking and the way he was interacting. I was 100% positive that he was going to live. So I told him, it's like, dude, you got nothing to worry about. We're going to get you to the hospital. You're going to be fine. And then we're going to get you some more help. The ambulance came, picked him up, transported him in critical, because that's what you do for every shooting victim. He did not survive the trip to the hospital. So I stood over this man for, I don't know how long it took the medics to get there, 8 to 10 minutes. And I assured him that he was going to be fine, that he wasn't going to die. That was a lie. That's a lie that I'm going to have to live with. Although I don't know if I would have done anything differently. At least, I don't think I would have said anything differently. Let's put it that way. There's another story I want to talk about lying. It was another shooting, and it was in the same neighborhood. This woman called in, said that her boyfriend had been shot. We arrived on scene, and from where we were on the street, we could see a man laying on the porch. His feet were on the steps. His body was laying up towards the door on the porch. His girlfriend was over him, giving him CPR and mouth to mouth. We ran up on the porch to see what we could do. The girl wouldn't stop trying to give him CPR. So the first thing we did was we got her away from him so that we could start administering first aid or evaluate the situation and see what was going on. I remember tapping her on the shoulder and getting her attention and having to physically pull her off of her boyfriend. And when she looked up at me, she was covered in blood. She had blood like here running down her shirt. I think she was wearing a white t-shirt that night. She looked like a vampire had been feasting on somebody. We looked down at the guy and he had a lot of blood in his face. It turns out that he was a drug dealer, which we're being told is a non-violent offense. So he was just a regular run-of-the-mill non-violent drug offender. And some people came to his house looking for him. He decided to walk out to their car with a firearm in his hand because he was expecting something non-violent to happen. We found a couple of 12-gauge shotgun shells in the street as well as some 9mm rounds. He was the one carrying the 9mm. Somebody in the truck or the vehicle, I don't know what kind of car it was carrying probably a double-barrel shotgun. They were sitting down. He was standing over the car pointing the gun at them. They fired up out of the car and hit him right here at an upward angle with a shotgun. He was able to stagger to his front porch before he collapsed. That's when his girlfriend started giving him CPR. If you know anything about the human body, if you take a shotgun round from an upward trajectory in this area, your lungs are going to be completely destroyed. So there was a lot of blood in his lungs that was coming out of his mouth, and that's why she looked like a vampire. The street was beginning to fill up with police officers, and we had to keep the road as clear for medics as possible. I wanted to get her away from her boyfriend to try to calm her down, try to get information about possible suspects, and try to figure out what was going on. We needed to get the information as quickly as we could. So I grabbed her. We walked into the house. We walked clear through the house, out to the back porch, and I sat out on the back porch with her. I had her sit down. I actually stood up. I stood out there and talked to her for a very long time. An ambulance came. They pronounced her boyfriend dead on the front porch. When someone's pronounced dead in a scene like that, the body stays where it is in the crime scene so that the crime scene can stay intact. So that means that I had to stay on the back porch with this girl who was just trying to give CPR to her boyfriend who was dead and she didn't know it. And she had his blood all over her. Somebody went in the house and got her a towel. We helped her wash her face, but her clothes were still covered in blood. We did everything we could to try to keep her calm. I remember somebody pulled up and asked if I needed anything, and she'd been begging for cigarettes, and her boyfriend had her cigarettes, and we weren't able to get the cigarettes from him. So I asked a cruiser to go get her some cigarettes, and he brought some cigarettes back to her. Got her a bottle of water, some cigarettes. We were doing everything that we could to keep her calm while we waited for either detectives to come or for us to have the opportunity to take her somewhere else. She began asking where her boyfriend was. I have my walkie on. I know where her boyfriend is. He's still out on the front porch. He was dead. But I told her that the medics came and that they transported him and they were doing everything they could to save his life. I told her that he was likely to be in surgery, so she wouldn't be able to see him anyway. And it was important that she stay on scene so that she can talk to detectives so that we can solve this crime and we can catch whoever it is that shot her boyfriend. As time went on, she became more and more and more frustrated with me. She wanted to go see her boyfriend. She wanted to get to the hospital. He was at the hospital. She wanted to be at the hospital. And I had to keep telling her that she couldn't go to the hospital. And I let her believe that her boyfriend was still alive, because I wanted her to be able to keep it together long enough emotionally so that she could give us as much information as possible so we could catch these people that had just shot her boyfriend. If I had told her that her boyfriend was dead and he was still laying on the front porch, I don't think we would have gotten any of that information from her. And in my opinion, figuring out who did this was the most important thing that I could do at that time. So I sat there and I lied to her for probably an hour, hour and a half. It's a lie that I'm not going to take back. I'll own that lie. It was the right thing to do. As we sat out there, and she began to get more and more and more frustrated with me. She became angry and she was crying. She was smoking on her cigarette. She'd gone through a bunch. I became the focus of her rage. She didn't know her boyfriend was dead. She just wanted to be with him, and I was the thing that was keeping her from being with him. She wasn't angry at the people that shot him. She wasn't angry at him for living a lifestyle that allowed him to be shot. She was angry at me because I was keeping her from him. I remember she was so full of rage, and she looks me dead in the eye. She stood up. She was tall. She might have even been a little bit taller than me. She stood up and she looked at me and she said, "You don't give a fuck. You don't care about anything. You must really love your job, don't you?" I stood there calmly. I looked her in the eye and I said, "You know what? I don't always love my job." Those are my thoughts for today.